Today on Locked On Red Wings, we do a 2025 draft profile on forward Carter Bear with Max Bultman of The Athletic.
You're Locked On Red Wings, your daily podcast on the Detroit Red Wings. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back to the Locked On Red Wings podcast. I am your host, Brian Fisher. I'm a color commentator for Oakland University, ACHA, D1 men's hockey. Not alone. I'm no Scotty today, but we are joined by Max Bultman of The Athletic. He is the Detroit Red Wings beat writer for The Athletic, and he is going to help me profile Carter Bear, a 2025 eligible draft prospect. And Max, how you doing? It's been a while since you've been on.
Yeah, it has. No, I mean, I feel like we came on right before the collapse, sometime around there, right in the middle of the late season collapse. So yeah, a lot has taken place since the last time.
It was during the Four Nations break when we had a lot of episodes to fill and not a lot of action going on. We had to come on and right before, and I this sticks in my head. I think I referenced it on yesterday's episode too because I was recapping Yzerman and McClellan's seasons. And at one point you said during that episode, it's like, at what point is it no longer a new coach bump? Cue collapse. And the team just fell apart right after that. That was not your fault. The timing of it was just really funny because every single loss after that, I was like, I guess this is the end of the new coach bump, Max. I had that in my head the whole time. I'm like, I guess that's when it ends. But today we bring you on in a different capacity because it's time to start prospect profiles as Red Wings are picking 13th overall in the 2025 entry draft. And Max, you have a penchant for calling your shot and getting it right. You have done so officially on the podcast for 2 of the last 3 years, but you've told me 3 straight years who you thought the guy was. I just unfortunately let somebody else call dibs on MBN last season.
That's right.
And so you had to pick somebody else to profile, but you've correctly called your shot for 3 straight seasons. This season, you're calling your shot again with Carter Bear of the Everett Silvertips out of the WHL, and we're going to profile him, but before I get to that, I got to let the people know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. All right, Max. Carter Bear, he is a 6-foot forward, 176 pounds according to Elite Prospects, so that he might be bigger than that at this point. And he had a pretty solid season, to say the least, with the Everett Silvertips of the WHL. 82 points, 56 games, rather. When you look at Carter Bear, what makes you say this is a good fit for the Detroit Red Wings?
A lot. I mean, you look at the Red Wings pipeline, and there's a lot of good. I mean, there's, including the guys they already have in the NHL, you got a couple of pillars, two-way big defense types on the back end in Mo Seider and Simon Edvinsson. You got a smaller power play type in Axel Sandin Pellikka on the way. You look up top in their forward group, and you got, Lucas Raymond, Marco Kasper, Dylan Larkin, Nate Danielson's on the way, Michael brandsegg-nygard's on the way. But I think you could use just a little more kind of skill and particularly hard skill in that group. And that, to me, is how I settled on Carter Bear as kind of this missing puzzle piece type, right? I think he's a player who, no, he's not the biggest player, but he plays hard. Is he the flashiest guy in the world? I don't think so, but I think he's got a lot of skill. And I think in particular, he uses that skill in the hard areas of the ice. He's not a blazer, but he's a good enough skater. And I just look at this and I see a top 6 forward who's going to be able to play in the middle of the ice, who's going to score a lot of goals, who can make the skill play, and who can also he plays fearless as well. He plays tough. So to me, that just checks a lot of boxes for where the Red Wings are trying to go. Would you love him to be an inch taller? Sure. Would you love him to be a little faster? Yeah. But I think there's a lot to like here. When you're picking 13th, it's a good package. There's obviously one big question. He had his season ended early, reportedly an Achilles injury. That's not what you want to hear going into a draft. But I think at 13, you look at it and you say, if this guy, recovers to his form, which, I'm not a doctor. I can't say the likelihood one way or another, but I like the player enough that I'd be willing to take that chance.
Yeah, and you sing a lot of praises of him there where it makes you question, why is he going in a lot of these mocks in between 10 and 20? Because I've heard a lot of really good things about him. I've read a lot of really good things about him besides just what you brought up just now. Not necessarily red flags, but what are reasons why maybe he slips out of that top 10 to the 10 to 15 range rather than going in that premier range?
Well, you look at recent drafts. I mean, how many times have we had a skilled winger, 5'11" or 6 foot, and fans are really excited about them, and they're still there, and they're still there, and they're still there, right? I mean, Joachim Kimmel, Jonathan Lecker-Amaki, Zach Benson. There's more that I'm just spacing on, but there's all the time in the draft. There are players like Cole Caulfield, right? I'm not saying he's Cole Caulfield, but this profile, right? The smaller winger is not the most premium position, right? And that's why in past years I've come on this show and said, go get the center, go get, the big body physical winger. Like these are the players that you cannot find in free agency that you have a hard time getting teams to trade you. Whereas almost every year there's a pretty skilled winger or 3 or 4 on the trade market. There's a few pretty skilled wingers available in free agency. And now when you're picking at 13, the advantage that you've given yourself by drafting the meat and potatoes, by drafting your D, by drafting your centers, is that now, hey, guess what? You get to be the team that everyone on draft day gets to be like, oh, wow, nice. They got this really skilled winger. And this one just so happens, in my opinion, to be someone who has some of those harder elements. I'm not saying he's as physical as Michael brandsegg-nygard, right? But I don't think he's going to be afraid to go down low and fight around the crease and poke pucks in. And that's the kind of offense I think the Red Wings need more of. So why is he still going to be there? A lot of it's because of the position. I think Victor Eklund has a chance to still be there. And he's a great prospect, right? He's a guy who I think probably more seen in that, like rated in that 7, 8, 9 range for a lot of people. And because he's a 5'11" winger and he's pretty skinny, there's a chance he's there. Hey, if he's there, I perfectly would endorse picking him too, right? He's got a lot of speed, really great skater, great shot, really competitive, but he's 5'11" and he's skinny. So I think he'll be in that early, 10, 11, 12 probably range, maybe 13. And I think Carter Berry, you can make a similar case, and he's got the Achilles injury, right? So that to me is why we're talking about him in this range. And I think it's the right range. That's how I rank, right? That when I look at these things, I don't put a ton of 5'11", 6'0" wingers in my top 7 or 8 because you just very rarely see that.
So primarily it sounds like the reason why he's falling is because of the position he plays is not as highly, not a high value, it is a high value position, but not as highly valued as a top defender or a center, on top of the fact that he also has that Achilles injury lingering. So there's question marks there. Is that basically, am I gathering the proper bullet points to that?
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, look, I'm not telling you, like, there are wingers that go high. Lucas Raymond is 5'11", went 4th overall. Matvei Michkov is 5'11" or 6 foot, went 6th or 7th overall, right? 7th overall. He's not as good as those players. I'm not telling you, watch out. He's just as good as them and you can get him at 13. That's not what I'm saying at all. I don't think he's an elite skill guy, but I think he's very skilled. I think he's a very talented offensive winger. I think Corey Pronman, our prospect writer, I think his competent was Troy Terry. So that gives you a good feel, right? Troy Terry's not going to light the world on fire, but you'd absolutely take Troy Terry in your top 6, would you not?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, and so you mostly answered this question, but I want to touch on it too, is that on Elite Prospects, right? And Elite Prospects is a great resource for a lot of people who are more casual like myself when it comes to observing these prospects. There's a reason why I always have outside people come on with prospect profiles, because I just don't have as much time on my hands to really look at a lot of these players. And Max, you do a great job of covering these players, but they list him as center/left wing, and you've talked about him exclusively as a winger in this episode so far. Is that center/ part of his profile kind of a misnomer? Is it a little bit misleading? Is he at this point in his development looking like he's going to be a winger?
For me, I would say winger, partly just because I don't think he's the fastest player, and I think that's one of the things I want from a center, especially a smaller center. But another one of those things is sense. Another one of those things is compete. I think he has those things in good measure. But yeah, I would say, for a 5'11", 6 foot, I think he's 6 foot, right? This is how he's measured. For a 6 foot player who's pretty skilled and not the greatest skater, I think usually you maximize your impact on the wing. So that's where I would put him.
Awesome. Max, we're going to head to a quick break here. When we return, I want to ask you a little bit more in depth about his floor versus ceiling. You touched on it a little bit. And then later on, we'll get into what you believe the Red Wings' priority should be this offseason. So stay tuned to segment 2 of Locked On Red Wings. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. New to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Segment 2, Locked On Red Wings podcast. I am joined by, I always want to say we, I'm missing Scotty right now. I am joined by Max Bultman of The Athletic as we break down a profile on forward Carter Bear of the WHL's Everett Silvertips. Max calling his shot for the 4th straight year on who he believes the Red Wings will target in the upcoming draft. And what I want to talk about here now, and probably the last thing I have on Carter Bear for you, Max, is when you look at his floor versus his ceiling, where do you see it? Do you see him as like a slam dunk NHL player? And if you do, like how high in the lineup do you think he could soar?
Well, I think if everything goes well, right? Like we've talked about the comp Corey put on him, Troy Terry. I think it's a smart comp, right? That's a good place to go for how high, like that can be a top line player for a team, or it can be like a second line player on a really, really good team. I mean, the other one you could think about is like maybe like a Carter Verhaeghe. And that's like a great example of a guy who's going to score some goals for you. He's going to be skilled, but he's not afraid to go down low. You can't be if you're going to play for the Florida Panthers team, right? So if you're dreaming, that's what you're hoping for. And I don't think that that's completely out of the question. Floor, it's this is where we come back to that question about the position and the size and all that, right? Is like when you're talking about a winger who is very skilled, I think there's a good offensive capability there. But if I'm wrong, and if he's not as skilled as I think he is, well, then how many times have we talked about, like Philip Zadina, right? Like was a very skilled scorer who skated all right and competed all right, but just never really stuck, right? So the question of floor, I think, is what drives a lot of players like this to not go in the top 7 or 8, because it's like, yeah, well, if we're wrong, and if he's not as good as we're hoping he is based on watching him in junior hockey, which can happen, well, like the floor's not that high. I mean, that's the reality, right? So this is where we talk about kind of taking a swing. I do think because of his competitive traits, I really like that. That makes me think, okay, this is a guy who's going to be able to chip in on a third line, like pretty likely at a minimum, right? Like he's going to be able to score for you. He's going to play hard for you on the wing. He's not so small at 6 foot. We're not talking about a 5'9" guy here. But I think there's still some translatable tools there that could make him a good, at that point, I would say like top 9 forward, right? But if the skill is not as strong as I think it is, or it doesn't translate as well, or, we talked about this injury, if the injury really affects him, those are all realities you have to discuss when you're drafting. And I think that's why you love your centers who have this really projectable way to impact the game, right? Your 6'2" center is going to play for you. He just is. Like he's gonna, who can skate well and whatever. Like that's a profile that tried and true teams have found a place for their lineup for that player. The smaller offensive winger, usually there's fewer spots for that.
Well, and it's always so funny too when we talk about forwards in the NHL, how we talk about guys who are 5'11" versus guys who are 6 foot. That 1 inch can make or break an entire narrative. You get guys like, Alex DeBrincat might not be the best example, but on a little bit on the smaller side, but hustles hard and plays hard, not afraid to get in the corners. And then you have guys who are like, Michael Rasmussen, who's building a little bit of a narrative, who's 6'3" and sometimes doesn't engage as much in the corners. So it's interesting to see how that narrative shifts. And he's 6 foot. He's 18 years old. He could still grow a little bit too. So he's not overly small. Anyways, I'm digressing.
But what I would say on that, right, is like Rasmussen, he went 9th overall. Yeah, obviously he hasn't looked like you would want a 9th overall pick to look. But let's say he went 18th, right? I think he's like right around there in his draft class in scoring, right? And we would probably say that how his career has gone out offensively has been toward the lower end of the potential outcomes. But guess what? Michael Rasmussen is still a really relied upon player for the Red Wings. They play him like 14, 15 minutes a night. He gets tough minutes at the end of games. He PKs, right? Like they've used him on the top line left wing at times when they have a need there, because that skill set translates to a lot of different roles and a lot of different spots in your lineup. DeBrincat, like he's worked out amazing. How many guys of that profile have worked out not amazing and you don't talk about them anymore? We mentioned Zadina. He's not in the NHL anymore, right? Everyone was loving the upside, including me, of Zadina on that draft day. But if it doesn't hit, there's just less places to put that guy. So it worked for DeBrincat. Like it's a great point that like DeBrincat's one of the most engaged, intense players the Red Wings have. But if it doesn't work quite like that, that's where you see the size come into play, because you can always find a place to put Michael Rasmussen.
100%. And I was just talking about that yesterday. I mentioned the fact that Michael Rasmussen's had himself a very nice NHL career. The only reason people there's that kind of, I don't want to say negative narrative, but like sometimes people don't look upon him favorably, is just because he was probably drafted higher than he should have. And I believe in 2017, I was still in college, but I think the narrative at the time, Max, was that he was a reach at that moment. People said at 9th overall, it was a little bit too high to take a guy like that. But if he was taken, like you said, at 18th overall, that's a solid draft pick. And people,
he's 18th overall in his draft in scoring, and he's a good defensive player. Like, I would argue he probably should have gone at like 15 or 16 overall, right? Like, and then you're pretty happy with everything, but it's just not the way it always works out. And I don't know. I wasn't on the beat for Rasmussen's draft, so I don't know how he was thought of going into that, but it's why teams like the big center, right? Like they love it because there's just always a place to put that guy.
Yeah, that's completely fair. While you were talking about forwards under 6 foot that don't work out, Timo Pulkkinen's name popped in my mind. Guy with big cannon shot, couldn't hit the net. If you can't do that and you don't have a,
but that's where I'm drawn to Bears compete, right? Is I do think, right, and he is 6'0", right? He's not a sub 6 foot, like, and you talk about how that inch can mentally play a role, whether it should or shouldn't, I have no idea, but it does. You see that 6 and you go, okay, yeah, that's a big enough guy.
As soon as it hits 6, you're like, that he's tall.
Tall enough, right? Like, but yeah, so I think the compete gives him a good floor as like a third line scorer type, right? It's just a matter of, will you be thrilled about 13th overall if that's the outcome? Maybe not. But in my opinion, there's enough paths to a top 9 forward, and including some paths to like a potentially top line forward. This is why I feel good about this player. I think he has a lot of the things their system is missing. He just kind of checks a lot of those boxes. There's other guys. We could have talked about Kayshawn Aitchison today. I love Kayshawn Aitchison. I think he'd be awesome for them. My gut is he probably goes before 13 because good skating, physical defenseman with a big shot. Again, you always have a place for that guy, so they tend to go high. But if he's there, Kayshawn Aitchison would have been great. But when I just look at the total body of players in this range, the one who I think checks the most boxes and is most likely to be there, I keep coming back to Carter Bear. And
also just kind of fits the profile of a lot of the players that Yzerman likes to look at too. I mean, you look at MBN from last season, he has the big shot, but he's also a hard compete guy. He's not afraid to get in the corners. And you saw, I mean, you wrote some really great articles. You went out there to watch those Grand Rapids games, and you saw how he started out on the 4th line and worked his way up to the top line in the course of 5 total games with Grand Rapids between the end of the regular season and the playoffs, and he ended up being point per game in the playoffs in that sweep. Like, he was one of their most productive players. Now, part of that too, I do want to throw this out there. I don't know what the Texas Stars defense was doing on a couple of those plays. Like, you leave a shooter like that wide open, uncontested in front of the net, he's probably going to score. But hey, he got to the scoring areas and he buried his opportunities, and that is more power to him.
Other thing is, like, good luck even if there had been a defender there, you going to knock him over? He's 6'1" and 210, and you can go there, but I think he might outmuscle you even if you are. It won't be as clean of a look for him, that's for sure. But like, that's one of the things I like about brandsegg-nygard is he goes to the right areas, and he's big enough that even if other teams are on him, like, I think he can play through that and score a bunch of goals that way.
And you know what's funny is, like, this is a little bit of a digression, but we're pretty much done talking about Carter Bear anyway, so why not just ad-lib a little bit here? When people talk about the hype around those 2 young players coming over from Europe, right, who played for the same SHL team, ASP and MBN, the 2 acronyms, there's more hype around ASP, and I get that because he's the flashier player. But I think you and I are both in agreement that ASP probably could use a year in Grand Rapids after seeing how he got worked in the defensive zone in a lot of those games, where I personally, I'm not going to speak for you here, but I personally feel like MBN next season would have a better shot. Not that I think he will, but if you're going to compare them 1-to-1 next to each other, I think MBN would have the better shot simply because of those elements of his game I think would translate better to North American ice at the NHL level. I do think at the end of the day, he probably does not make the team, but if you're comparing them next to each other, I think he'd have the better opportunity.
Between MBN and Pellica or MBN and Danielson?
ASP.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I could buy that. I don't know. Like, I had thought before the time in Grand Rapids that Axel Sandy and Pellica had a pretty decent shot to make this team next year. I don't want to move off of that after 5 games, but what I did see was not a player who's like, you have to put this guy in the NHL. He looked like a guy who could probably use some time to adjust to the North American ice and the speed of it and the physicality of it and all that. I think that applies to both of those guys, but we'll see. Like, I think those two and Danielson are all of interest come training camp. I'd put the odds for all of them more toward Grand Rapids, but if any single one of them made Detroit, I don't think I'd be totally floored.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing about Danielson, too, is this entire season, I've been keeping track of his scoring, so that's a big thing that a lot of Red Wings fans wanted to see take that step forward, is the scoring at the AHL level. And I think I shouldn't say a lot of, but at least me personally, I had this assumption that he just wasn't quite finding the back of the net as much as I wanted him to. And then I looked at his comparables to Casper the year before, and I'm like, they scored at the same clip. So it's like, was I just in the wrong mindset with Danielson?
No, I think I expected Danielson to outscore Casper by like a healthy margin, because there's they're similar profiles, right? They're big, good skating, two-way centers. But I would say Danielson's is more on the skilled playmaking end of that spectrum, whereas Casper's is more on the like nonstop motor end of the spectrum. So whereas it doesn't surprise me that Casper came on at the end of the year, I was a little surprised at what the offensive totals ended up being, right? Because I thought my read on Casper, going back to the first time, first of that streak that you talked about, right? We came on here and we talked about Casper, and I think I was pounding the table like, this is a great player. Everyone's question on him at the time was, what's his offensive ceiling? I didn't dispute that question. I just said he's good enough that I don't care how many points are next to his name, because this motor is nonstop. He's going to create so many chances off of that, including some that he's going to finish and some that he's going to set up. I don't think I saw coming like the level of scoring. By the end of the season, he was on like his second half was like a 30 goal, almost 60 point pace. Like that's not something I saw coming at age 21. With Danielson, I don't know that I'm saying I expected that much offense, but I did think there's more of like, okay, this is a guy who skates great, big body, sees the ice really well, good hands. Like I could have seen him putting up like 45, 50 points in the AHL this year. More like 50 points, I think would have been like my guess for what he would have done. So he was under that. Like I was just like you. I would watch him and I go, yeah, he played well. And then I would look at the stats and go, oh, he didn't have any points. Like I don't know what to make of that. Like I still, just in the same way as I talked about with Casper, I still really like Nate Danielson, regardless of how much offense he's putting up, because I like how his impact on the game. I like that he's a really smart player, excellent defensive centerman. If he ends up as a third line center, he's going to be a really good third line center. And I don't think people should be disappointed in that. But obviously he was the 9th overall pick. People want offense. And I'm among the people who kind of thought he'd have more offense this year.
Right. And Max, we've talked about the draft. We've talked about the farm system. So why don't we go full circle and also talk about free agency on the other side of this break? Stay tuned to segment 3 of Locked On Red Wings. Segment 3, Locked On Red Wings podcast, joined by Max Bultman of the Athletic Beer League extraordinaire, occasional teammate. Max, the Red Wings this offseason have an opportunity. The opportunity that a lot of teams also have with the cap rising, but there's quite a few names on the open market that are of note. Obviously, number one is Mitch Marner, but you could go down that list and at least guys who, as of right now, have not re-signed with their teams, put that in there as an asterisk. Yep. But, the Detroit Red Wings took a step back this last season, and they're going to have probably around $20 million in cap after signing a couple of cheap RFAs. What do you think your priorities would be if you were the general manager of the Detroit Red Wings right now?
What day does this come out? Does this come out tonight?
This comes out on the 22nd, so it'll be Thursday, May 22nd.
All right, so I'll have an article also coming out on the 22nd that covers exactly this. So a nice little lead-in. Your listeners will probably get it just a little bit before even the website gets it. So to me, it's three things. A top six forward, preferably that's a physical left wing. But hey, if Mitch Marner wants to come and be 100-point right wing, you'll find a way to move that around to accommodate that.
You figure it out.
Exactly, right? I think they need a top 4D just to balance things out a little bit better, alleviate some of the burden on Ben Sherratt, on Albert Johansson, at least on one of the two. And I think they need a depth forward who can give them a little harder of an identity in the bottom six. So some of the players that I talked about for those, we'll start with that last one because it's the shortest list. The guys in free agency that stood out to me, are Brandon Tanev, really physical, kind of a classic fourth line forechecker, but as pure of an identity guy as I think you're going to find. And there's a reason that you saw the Winnipeg Jets trade for him this year. I think it's exactly that. Trent Frederick, the Edmonton Oilers, the guy that Edmonton added gearing up for their run. He had a down year this year, but he put up the previous 2 seasons, 17 and 18 goals. He's 6'3". He consistently averages like 2 hits a game. He's a big body that I think would be potentially even on your third line, right? He can be that enforcer type, but he can also chip in offense. I think that's pretty valuable. And the last guy does not have some of those like mean elements. I think he averages like less than a hit per game, or maybe even less than half a hit per game. But it's Connor Brown, and he's a really good scorer, good defensive impacts, good penalty killer. I think if you made him a third line scorer, that could give you a little bit more punch in the bottom 6 without sacrificing some of the like ability to check elements that you're going to want. He's been really good for Edmonton in these playoffs. He's 3rd or 4th on their team in playoff scoring so far as we record this ahead of the Wednesday night game. So those are the guys I picked for that category. Do you want to discuss them and we can go to the next, or do you want me to just rapid fire through all this?
Oh, just rapid fire. I'm loving it.
Okay.
I have a follow-up question after it's all done, but yeah.
Okay. Defenseman, the big name's Vladislav Gavrikov, right? I mean, he checks so many boxes. I think he has the literal best defensive, like expected goals against numbers in the NHL last year among defensemen who played at least 500 minutes. Familiarity with Todd McLellan and Trent Yawney. Be a left shot. You could play him with Mo Seider. You could play him on the second pair and move Simon Edvinsson up with Mo Seider. I think he would be phenomenal as a fit for the Red Wings. He'd probably be, if not the most demand, one of the 2 most in demand defensemen on the market. So good luck. But that familiarity with the coaches could give you an in. Aaron Ekblad would be the other guy who I would think could be the most sought after defenseman on the market, especially after this playoff run with the Panthers. But guess what? He's from Windsor. You might have a decent case with him, right? He's from not too far away. Maybe that feels like going home to him. You do worry about the body. He's had some injuries. He plays a physical style. He's played a lot of playoff hockey the last 3 years. And if you're going to give him a 6 or a 7 year deal, you got to be pretty confident that that's going to hold up. But former first overall pick, has had a really good career, has been on a team that won at least 1 Stanley Cup. And by the time it's July 1, he may have won another. So he's going to have as good a resume as anybody. After that, I think it's pretty thin class for defensemen, frankly. Dmitry Orlov, Ryan Lindgren, they've been top 4D on good teams. I don't think anyone should cry if they sign those 2 guys, but I don't think it's as exciting. I don't think it's as big of a needle mover. Maybe a little more risk that you're in that middle ground territory and you end up not loving the contract 2 years from now. And then the RFA name is Bowen Byram, who
I wrote that name down. I was going to ask if you didn't get to him. All right, go ahead.
No, I mean, let's talk about it. It's a fascinating question, right? Because in Seider's draft class, Seider wasn't the first defenseman off the board. Bowen Byram was. And Bowen Byram's had an interesting career too, right? He won the Stanley Cup with the Colorado Avalanche. He's had a ton of concussions. That probably scares you a little bit, but now he's on the Buffalo Sabres. They've committed a ton of money to left shot defensemen. He makes sense as a guy for them to trade if you can convince Buffalo to trade him in the division. And if you have what Buffalo wants, which good luck ascertaining that, right? Like they seem to kind of want now players. You look at what they traded Dylan Cousins for. I think Dylan Cousins better than Josh Norris, but Josh Norris is at least a guy that, and I think you probably could have gotten more than Josh Norris if you're willing to take picks and prospects. Just me talking a little bit out of school, but that's my hunch. But Josh Norris was a now NHL player. So there's that. I do think Bowen Byram could be a good partner for Moritz Seider. It's just, are you confident in, the head injuries? Do you feel good paying him when you know you're going to have to do a deal for Edvinsson next year, and you're probably going to have to do a deal for Sandy Pellikka 3 years from now? That's going to, if things go well, you certainly want that to be a big contract.
Right.
There's a lot to dig into there.
Yeah, and the Bowen Byram one is so interesting too because, I wonder how much I'm getting shades of DeBrincat with this because of the fact that he's an RFA, and there was a report out today that he basically wants out because he wants to go to a team where he can get a better role, and he's playing behind Dahlin and Power right now, so he doesn't feel like he's being utilized to his fullest potential. And when an RFA like that holds out, sometimes they actually can impact the value of themselves, right? You think about, and DeBrincat you still gave up a first-round pick for, which was fair, but for a guy who scored 40 goals twice in his career, everything outside that first-round pick really didn't feel like you were giving up a whole heck of a lot. And so, again, part of it comes down to DeBrincat wanted to be here specifically, so they could, obviously, if there's multiple suitors, work up a higher value on that trade. But, you wonder, too, with him wanting out, how that impacts any possible trade value he could have.
Well, the question to what you just said, right? I don't have any firsthand reporting on what Byram wants, right? But you just said
Right.
Behind Owen Power, behind Rasmus Dahlin. If I'm a GM and I hear that, my first thought is, if I'm the GM of the Red Wings, is he going to be okay not being power play 1 behind Mo Seider? Because Mo Seider just ran like the 4th best power play in the NHL last year.
Right.
I would not be in a hurry to change anything about that group. So if you're telling me that's a question, that would make me a little anxious. Yeah, I don't want to trade for a guy, and then he's like, well, why am I not power play 1? Not saying that's how he would be, but that's just, based on what you said, that's how I would think, right? So
Right.
There's only so many teams that can offer that, right? Like if you're San Jose, yeah, you can give him power play 1. You can give it to him today. But if you're Detroit, you would have to say, well, are we sure he's better than Mo Seider at running the power play? A year ago, you might have said that's a pretty decent bet, but I don't know. I just watched Mo Seider run a pretty amazing power play.
Right. And, I do want to touch on, too, the Mitch Marner of it all. Obviously, you mentioned him to lead things off, but you brought up a really interesting point, and I think it's true that Mitch Marner, while being like the most premier player on the free agent market, also it plays right side, which is not an area of need for the Red Wings necessarily. They need a left side winger. And while he is a top penalty killer on the Toronto Maple Leafs, there's a lot of other holes on this team that need to be filled in the meantime. If you could get Mitch Marner under contract with Detroit, do you feel like that would be a worthwhile move, while knowing that would kind of prevent you from getting some of those other names you already listed?
I do. It's a valid conversation, but I think he's one of the 10 to 15 best players in the NHL. We can debate all day, like the contract. Would I want to make him the highest paid winger in the NHL? No, but you don't get that choice in free agency. That's what happens, right? I don't think the New York Rangers regret for 1 second making Artemi Panarin the highest paid winger in the NHL 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago. And I think that's the best comparison, like for a free agent, right? There's just not that many players like this that come up in free agency. John Tavares went to the Maple Leafs, right? Very different player than Marner. You had to make him an $11 million player to get him. I don't think the Leafs can regret that deal. So I look at Panarin and I say, yep. I mean, I see you can make a lot of the same questions. He's a small, skinny winger. But I think Marner's actually like an outstanding defensive forward.
Yes.
There's the playoff issues for sure, but I do think a lot of that is not just on Marner. It's hard to talk about because Marner hasn't, I would say, been good enough in the big games for the Leafs. But you can also say, look, it's a team sport, and we've had this fishbowl effect on the Leafs where, for all their struggles, all of it seems to fall at the feet, criticism-wise, of Mitch Marner and Austin Matthews. And Marner's production in the playoffs is fine. It's not good enough in the big games. It's not good enough in games 5, 6, 7. But if I'm signing him in free agency, that's not what I'm going to worry about at the end of the day. I would worry a little bit about having 4 wingers at like 6 foot or below in my top 6 with Lucas Raymond, Alex DeBrincat, Mitch Marner, Patrick Kane. I would worry about that. That's where I think you can debate, would you rather have a Sam Bennett for $4 or $5 million less? Like, I think that's a conversation. Would you even rather have a Brad Marchand, who's even shorter than Mitch Marner, but just always seems to step up in those moments, has that edge that you're looking for? Totally. You can have that conversation. But if I told you can have one of the 10 or 15 best players in the NHL, how are you going to turn that down in the Red Wings position?
So Scotty and I talked about it on Monday, and that was the thing we kept saying. It's like, yeah, all those things are detractors, but at the end of the day, he's a 100-point winger, and those guys don't hit the market very often. And I actually, in the description of that episode, I used John Tavares as the comparable, in that I think Tavares was the last time a guy of this caliber, production-wise, hit the free agent market. So, and I think Wind Wheel Podcast said it best the other day, where it's like the Red Wings do not have the luxury of which to be picky with what superstars they choose from.
Yep.
Like, if a guy of this caliber hits the market, yeah, you have other holes that you need to address, but this is a 100-point score. Like, you have to at least kick the tires and make a competitive offer. And if he says no, he says no. But That my bias is showing through here too, because this is the guy, of course, like many other Locked On podcasts, probably want him. But for me, that'd be
everyone should. I mean, like
right.
32 teams, including the Toronto Maple Leafs, should want this guy. The Maple Leafs probably can't have him because of the way it's gone. They probably have to split. But when that happens, every other team in the NHL should be calling. And that includes the Red Wings. You have to offer. You have to know that probably means making him the highest paid winger in the NHL. Do you love giving him more money than Mikko Rantanen, who's absolutely shredding through the playoffs right now and is a 6'5" moose of a man is getting? No, I wouldn't love it. But Mikko Rantanen's not on the market. Mitch Marner is. I think you have to do what you have to do. I'm not going to $14 million. I don't know if I'm going to $13.5 million. Right? I don't know. Like 13 is probably my hard line. It seems like a lot of money to me. To go over Mikko Rantanen when these are the profiles, but they don't hit the market that often every day. So I would be willing to go to 12.5. I'd be willing to go to 13. I don't think I'd go any higher. At that point, I think I'd say, okay, well, I can plug other holes for that money.
Right. And there are a lot of other skilled wingers right now that are at least projected to hit free agent market if they don't re-sign with their teams before July 1st hits. But Max, it's been a pleasure. We're already over time, but we talked about everything with the season, with this organization and what they need to do, what we hope they do. I really appreciate you coming on. And where can people find your stuff?
I'm on theathletic.com and I'm on Twitter at M_Bultman.
Awesome. Max, again, thank you to the listeners. I'll be back tomorrow. I'm doing a little bit of a crossover with the Grindline podcast, so stay tuned for that. Same time, same place. Oh, we ball. Same time, same place. It's your team every day.